I'm Jeremy Till, and this is Amplify. Jason Wallace joins us today on the podcast, sharing his heartfelt story of his ups and downs, really seeing success early on in life, winning 2 state championships in the state of Texas in football, which is a legacy, going into college, playing college football as well seeing semifinals in playoffs in that division that he was in. So just sharing early successes and then really stepping into life, getting married, having children, life situations coming in, bumping them around, especially business setbacks as well. And now moving through a decade of challenges, coming into, what he shared with us, his best year yet, working with investments with T. Boone Pickens, one of his financial arms that he works with. So just a really unique story that has helped him to fashion 5 insights or 5 intentions that can help you to set your daily task and your yearly task on seeing the best in life and how to succeed and overcome. And we're excited about his podcast. Want you to talk about, not only your professional life, but also, the full circle of life. Do you mind talking about your family at all?
Sure, would love to. Maybe I'll go back a little bit to kind of set the stage, if that's okay. So, I think in general, I would kind of categorize my story, Jeremy, as one of kind of success to tragedy or challenges to a comeback kind of story. And so, in order to set the pace for or set the stage for kind of what's going on with our family and our life right now, my first 25 years were pretty golden. Like I just really was successful at a lot of things, not because of any silver spoon, but really because of hard work, and also more importantly, just due to incredible support network, an incredible healthy family. Really growing up, I was successful at most things that I put my mind to. I was a star football player, all state championship, played D1 ball, was seen as a leader in school, had, success, some success at music, and then also, really just in some other areas, qualified for Mensa and joined just because I thought it'd be interesting. And so, traveled the world. There's just a number of things in the first 25 to 30 years that kind of went well for me. I had a lot of accomplishments that followed me and felt like kind of came to a point where I expected greatness to follow my hard work, right? While still attributing it to, a lot of grace. Yeah.
So diving into that though, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Dallas.
Okay. And what high school did you go to?
I went to Trinity Christian Academy, TCA.
Okay. And then y'all won state championship what year?
91 and 92.
Nice. 2 championships.
Yeah, back to back.
Is that considered TAPS League or what?
It was. It's changed over the years, and so I'm not sure what it is now, but at the time it was the highest, kind of the biggest TAPS League. Yeah.
Nice. And what position did you play?
Played wide receiver and defensive back.
Nice. And then where'd you go play college ball?
I played at Stephen F. Austin, and was fortunate enough to be on a team that went to the playoffs, went to the semifinals in 95, I believe. So awesome. A lot of fun.
So after you finished college, you go into professional career?
I did. So basically, so at Stephen F. Austin, I played there for a couple of years, re-injured my knee, went to A&M and studied kinesiology with really a focus on physiology and anatomy and biomechanics. So was a fitness instructor and a sports performance coach for a couple years. Got my CSCS from NSCA and really pursued that course for a couple years. It was interesting because I enjoyed it, but I just was not intellectually challenged and grew increasingly anxious to kind of do something different and new. So a couple buddies were trading the markets in Austin, and they said, hey, come to Austin, we'll teach you our craft. And I did so, and I've been in investment management ever since in terms of a profession.
Okay, so what year and how old were you when you transitioned careers?
Yeah, that was 2002. So left Houston as a trainer and traveled to a number of different countries, kind of took some time off, and then came back to Austin and started that career path in '02. So I was 27 at the time.
Okay. And so 27 at the time. And so now, just jumping forward, your current position in the world professionally, and what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so professionally, I'm technically an independent consultant, but I have just one client firm I'm working with, which is called BP Capital Fund Advisors, which is an affiliate of T. Boone Pickens, if you're familiar with that name, and he's our chairman. So I'm a managing director for BP Capital. Really I'm building out the what's called the institutional division for that firm. 90% of my time is sales and marketing, with the balance really in product development, business development, and then also writing white papers with more of a marketing-centric focus. So what does my daily life look like? I have the opportunity to work from home, which is great. Our office is up in Dallas. They've provided me that opportunity after we lived there for a year. And so working from the house, really focusing on that as a career. And then we've got kiddos with some unique needs, and so a lot of my time is spent helping my wife Allie with them, and then as well as as we may get into just kind of this integrative health kind of comeback story and some of the things that we've learned from that over the last 10 years and applying that in my life today.
Yeah, so talking more about your profession, so give me a scenario of client relationship and what you do in that area, because I want to get a better grasp of your role as a professional.
Sure. So over the last 10 years, I've kind of in my infinite wisdom, which is very much a sarcastic comment, chosen this very entrepreneurial startup part of investment management, which historically has been more in what's called hedge funds. Currently don't work for a hedge fund, but still in its first 3 years of startup kind of phase. And so what we do is we run investment management products, so funds that people can invest in. But for me personally, I'm building out what's called the institutional divisions. So my clients and prospects are similar to, Harvard or Yale or Stanford on the endowment foundation side, or a, Verizon pension plan, or a Texas Teachers Trust on the corporate and public pension side. Really working with their chief investment officers and their kind of higher level decision makers in terms of whether or not our product is a fit for their investment.
Mm-hmm. So who can you name or talk about a high end client that you've recently picked up or you currently work with?
Yeah, so it's funny, we kind of joke internally. So one of our largest clients is a client who said, you can't use our name, but you can give a description. And by giving the description, most people, at least in our industry, kind of know who it is. So this is a top 10 corporate pension, and so they have put about $100 million with us, and they've been quite happy. They've been with us for a little bit over a year. So part of my role is bringing them on. Part of my role is client relations, to make sure that they're happy with what they have and understanding the investments that we've kind of offered to them.
Yeah. So when you're acquiring clients, are you cold calling just a list of potential clients?
It's both and. So now that I've been in the industry for 14 years, a lot of it is warm relationships and introductions through others. But 4 years, and still even today, probably 30% of my time is, having databases and having lists and cold calling and saying, hey, Jason Wallace from T. Boone Pickens firm, BP Capital, let me tell you why we've continued to be outperformers relative to our peers, relative to our benchmarks. And so, there's probably 30% still cold calling, but the majority now is kind of established relationships over the years with those key decision makers.
Yeah, cool. So now we got a little bit of a portrait of a start to finish, early years, where you are career-wise. You opened up talking about 25 years, tragedy to comeback. So crack that open. I imagine people are kind of tell us about that. What does that situation look like? Yeah,
so I mentioned all those accomplishments at the beginning, not hopefully not to be in a braggadocious way or arrogant way, but more to set the contrast to what the next 10 years look like, right? So the first, 25, 30 years were a lot of successes. And then, and then all that changed when I hit 30 years old. Now, for the listeners, I don't mean to insinuate that once you turn 30, everything turns to crap. But for me, it was a dramatic sea change. So, the following 10 years really proved to be incredibly challenging. And I'll give you kind of some examples of that. Just prior to me turning 30, my mom developed breast cancer. And although she survived, it was excruciating walking with her through that darkness. I met the love of my life, Allie, and within a couple years after getting married, she got pregnant with twins. Unfortunately, she went into preterm labor at 24 weeks, and the boys were born at 24 weeks, weighing 1.5 pounds each, so roughly the weight of a heavy stapler. And it kind of blew our world open. It was, their precious little bodies were hanging in the balance between life and death, and on the edge of viability. And we just desperately prayed that they would survive. They both had brain bleeds and almost died twice in the NICU. They had multiple surgeries and were on life support. I remember, Jeremy, so vividly, just late nights sitting in the NICU with Allie, trembling hands, resting on the incubator, just praying for their little lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, when they were finally released home after 4 months, we were so grateful, but we knew that there would be a lasting impact from their premature birth and their trauma. And indeed, the next years were dramatically difficult. It's impossible to put into words like how physically and emotionally hard it was. Just sleepless nights and emergency doctor room visits and rotating medicine and therapy sessions and just gut-wrenching moments of during that time. And we really, their care did and has really completely consumed us. A couple years later, they were diagnosed as both being on the autism spectrum, and that was like a bombshell, to our world. So that's the boys. Like I mentioned before. Meanwhile, kind of in some crazy idea in my head, I decided to join a very entrepreneurial and risky segment of investment management to kind of industry. And so between when the boys were born in 2007 and 2014, I went through several entrepreneurial startup ventures that did not make it. And we took the risks, but they simply didn't make it. We had to declare bankruptcy in 2010 due to medical expenses and also being out of work for a while. We had a number of disappointments on the music front. We walked several very close couple friends through gut-wrenching divorces. A member of our family, after 5 years of addiction, went missing and presumed dead, is still presumed dead. Meanwhile, we felt very strongly that we were supposed to adopt, kind of in the midst of all this craziness, and started the process several times of the year, and each time we had to halt. In 2013, we were placed with a 6-year-old kiddo from the Congo, and went to pick him up. Actually, the first time that we went, we weren't able to get him out due to some complications. And 2 months later, Allie went over to the Congo by herself, to one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and really went with a mission. It was an incredible thing. She's one of the most courageous, beautiful people that I know. It's fun to say that about your spouse, but she went over there and on mission. She said, "That is my son, and I'm not leaving until I bring him home." And so it was an act of resolve, an act of love. And so we did bring him back. And look, Johnny is a beautiful, just vibrant, huge personality kiddo, but he suffered incredible trauma in his formative years in the Congo. And we are still, and for a long time, we'll have to work through, things that I can't even share with listeners on a podcast, but things that will reverberate for years to come. And that's been part of the trauma of kind of the last 10 years. So, needless to say, in the words of one of my friends, it's been a uniquely challenging time. Certainly there's others who have been through far worse than we have, but between, the twins kind of events and history and Johnny's history and death in the family and some of these other things and the challenges financially and with work, it has been an effort to keep our eyes up over the last 10 years.
So with all that occurring, what were some of the lessons that you didn't see in that period, but now being able to look back, being into the future of the experience that you're like, oh, what were some key lessons that you learned that maybe you weren't aware of at the time, but now you can look back and go, oh, this.
Yeah, great question. So I'll kind of maybe break it into two parts. One is understanding your question, kind of where are we now that we can look back and say those were lessons learned, and then maybe the second part is what were some lessons learned while in the midst of it to kind of help us through it maybe. So I think one of the things that we had to learn the hard way, and people can believe it intellectually or cognitively, but until you really experience it, you won't truly believe it, is that control is an illusion. Control is an illusion. We try to control every element of our lives, and yet you're faced with kiddos in the NICU, the size of my hand, with translucent skin and on life support, and you realize, okay, there is nothing I can do except for pray and just be there. Right? And so I think one of the elements that we kind of took away is that control is an illusion. I think what I mean by that is that the controlling of our circumstances and our environment is really out of our control. And I think that one of the things that I believe is that we really overestimate our ability to control like situations and people. But on the flip side, we underestimate or underappreciate our ability to control our perspective and our response, right? If that makes sense. So overestimating our ability to control people and situations, but underestimating our ability to control our response and our perspective.
So can you give a real scenario of what like that would look like a real action?
Yeah, so I think for us, for example, for example, let's take the boys' kind of NICU experience, since we just mentioned that. There was nothing we could do to control how much better they were going to get, whether or not they were going to live, whether or not they were going to have, long-term consequences. We couldn't control what the doctors were doing. We couldn't control their situation. And yet, every night when we went home, we could control the perspective that we would take. Right? So we could either choose to sink down into depression and sink down into darkness, or we could kind of just decide to implement some practices that would help keep our eyes up, right? And so one of the things that I feel like has been maybe some of our biggest lesson, if I might just be able to share it, is from the last 10 years, is really implementing what I call the 5 intentions. So, our mind's modus operandi or our default mode, if you will, is really like self-consumptive and a survival-centric neuropathway development, right? So it's not an optimization of, or to use your podcast name, it's not an amplification of our lives, right? And so we were pre-programmed for this survival and for this self-thinking. The problem is that in that default state, our mind tells us that's the best thing for us, right? To be self-consumptive, to be inward-looking, right? And the reality, though, is it leaves us depressed and unfulfilled and non-productive and feeling unloved and disrespected. And so we really have to spend an enormous amount of time and effort reprogramming or redigging those neural pathways. So like during these 10 years, I think one of the biggest challenges and struggles was getting in that place of hardship and darkness, and yet turning, right, with these arrows of life's hurt and disappointment and regret and trying to kind of reprogram or re-dig those neural pathways. And the thing that we found, it takes time, there's no magic pills, but I think one of the things that we found to be the most effective way is what I call these 5 intentions. And so, what are these 5 intentions? Intentionally grateful, intentionally mindful, intentionally giving, intentionally forgiving, and intentionally inviting. And so, just real briefly, kind of to define those, intentionally grateful, I think that was one of the most powerful things that shifted our focus off of what should be or the circumstances that were difficult, and saying, what do we have right now that we're grateful for? Not a general gratefulness, but an actual articulation of something specific. I am grateful for blank. Life is so much better because of blank, and really spending a moment to revel in that gratefulness. Number 2, intentionally mindful, being fully present in the moment and not letting your mind wander to your to-do list, to how this person hurt your feelings the other day, or emotional worries or stresses. Intentionally giving, being proactively intentional in giving of time and resources and money, and even in conversation, right? I mean, how often do we sit in a conversation and we're not really listening to the person? We're thinking, okay, what am I going to say when it's my turn to talk, right? And just real quickly, the last 2, intentionally forgiving. Forgiving others, I think, is one of the most powerful things. We've encountered some real hurt from others over the last 10 years, right? And yet, when we hold grudges and anger towards someone else, we somehow think it's just and empowering. But what it does to our mind and our body, and even biologically to our body with stress hormones, has been pretty well documented, right? And so there's fewer things, what we found is empowering to fully free ourselves as forgiving others. And the second part of that is just forgiving ourselves and differentiating between guilt and shame, right? Guilt, there can be a sometimes healthy guilt if we've done something morally wrong or hurt others, and that's healthy to deal with that. But shame is this always unhealthy thing of who I am at my core is not good, or is I'm ashamed of who I am, right? So, and then the last one, I would say that, this is the one intention that admittedly is biased to my faith. And, it's the only one of the 5 intentions that I feel like could be left out by those of other faiths. And that's an intentional invitation of the Holy Spirit to guide my heart and my mind for the day. So the cool thing about this framework of the 5 intentions is that even if you're not someone of faith or spirituality kind of inclined, the other 4 can, I believe, dramatically change your life. I know it has for us, for Allie and I, through going through kind of all of this trauma.
Mm-hmm. Great. So now, just hearing all that, that's a window from 25 to 30. You're now what age?
41.
41. Yeah. So what's your next decade look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as we kind of have mentioned before, all these different things, I have passions and desires in a number of different areas, right? And so in terms of professionally, we'll continue down this track of building this firm and building this management. We've got a fantastic team, so I'm very optimistic about we're an outperformer in our area, so we'll continue to grow that. And then on other fronts, which we're very involved with, we're doing some things. We've got Allie and I have a music project that we're currently undergoing. She's an amazing singer and musician, and so we're quite excited about that. In the next couple months, we'll have a series of songs coming out. We're probably going to write 1 or 2 books, and I say probably because, if you say on the podcast you're going to do it, then you probably better do it.
Well, right? Then you better say you're going to do it.
So we'll probably write a biography, and then maybe this something along the lines of the 5 intentions as well. And so we're quite excited about that. And then, just continuing my own personal kind of integrative health comeback. I didn't really get to share, but real quickly, so something happened along the way, Jeremy, of all this stress of the last 10 years. And that was that, I think probably some people will probably be able to relate to it, is that with all the cortisol and adrenaline spikes in the last 10 years, like an up and down roller coaster of managing this stress, it all came to a head when we moved to Dallas to join Boone and his firm. The stress on the family was enormous. We were drowning in a number of areas. It was really a low point for us. But as a benefit at BP Capital, one of the things that we got was the annual physical at the Cooper Clinic, which is a really nice facility up in Dallas, full scale kind of assessment. And I went in for mine in April 2015, and it turned out to be a pretty illuminating moment for me. I had ballooned up to 226 pounds, 26% body fat, a bit high cholesterol. I had gotten a 50th percentile in a treadmill test, and as a former athlete and educated fitness practitioner, I'd never gotten 50th percentile of anything athletic in my life, and it was humbling to see the place I'd slid to, and I kind of at that moment said, no more. Made a commitment to change. Having a traditional kinesiology background, I was a little skeptical of CrossFit stuff, but I read the level 1 and level 2 coaching material, and I said, what, let's go ahead and give this a shot. And so in the next 4 months, I went from 26% body fat to under 10, went from 226 to 196. Did it primarily through traditional CrossFit workouts, body weight workouts, and more of a paleo nutrition. After those 4 months, I transitioned a little bit. I said, I want to maybe compete at this CrossFit thing. And so I went from CrossFit as fitness to CrossFit as sport. And as you well know, there's quite a difference between the two. But that switch required a number of changes, kind of switched to a competitive training program, went with more of a modified keto diet with some metabolic flexibility in terms of the carb timing, and that's where I am today. So I'm still dealing with some endocrine issues from 10 years of kind of cortisol spikes, and still have some technical modality weaknesses that I'm working on, but hopefully we'll qualify for the not the games, but the qualifying round for the Masters this next spring. So I say all that to say that kind of my fitness pursuits are also entwined with that next 10-year plan that you ask about.
Mm-hmm. So in your head, whenever this is something I deal with, and I'm curious how you process, when you look at your former athletic self in your 20s and now you're in your 40s, how do you say, what I was able to do and what I'm capable of doing now, and is there a reconciling process to that? How do you look at that from your mind's eye?
Oh man, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when you formerly ran a 4.4 40 and now you run a 4.4 like 10 yards to the fridge, I mean, it's like it'll rock your world, right? And so I definitely deal with that every day. I mean, as being a Masters athlete, I have just had to come to the realization that I'm not going to be able to compete at the level I did 20 years ago in some areas. And yet, in some other areas, I'm getting close to being as fit as I was then, especially with some of the time domains that are a little bit longer. The biggest thing for me in terms of the difference is just the mobility work and the sleep hygiene and the things that I could have gotten away with 20 years ago, can't get away with today. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. I do 2 to 3 mobility sessions a day. I mean, it's really necessary for this old man to keep on track.
Absolutely. So kind of move it into some questions, and I want to see if you have anything that you want to share specifically, but some specific questions. We always like to get into your mind and hear where your mindset is, and learn about maybe some books that you've read, some podcasts that you listen to, or any movies that have really inspired you and impact you on your life.
Yeah, I mean, there's really only one. It's the Amplify podcast.
Oh, yeah, right?
I just put that on repeat.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I listen to. No, I really do really enjoy your podcast, and it's an honor, privilege to be on it. I mean, I've had a lot of pretty impacting books, as well as people in my lives. I would say some some C.S. Lewis's books have been a big impact on me. So, Philip Yancey's What's So Amazing About Grace. In terms of kind of productivity in life, I read a book back in college that I've implemented the practices ever since, and that's Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And
it's unique that you speak about that book, and I really think about Stephen Covey, who's a world class in the study of human development. And really today, in the sense of what 7 Habits was, with what they talk about life hacks today and all these tests, but really what he did in studying the habits of highly successful people and packaging that, and his research in the self-development over the last century and moving into 20th century, and just looking, because what I love about him and just going back and rereading some of his content, how he really describes over the centuries of how humans and how we've worked through self-development, through the self-ethics, through the the different processes of the human being. So he's a very talented individual, and I think that now with pop culture and a lot of stuff that comes out, reverting back to the 7 Habits and really looking at where that was generated, I think is a key study for anybody wanting to set a foundation for self-development.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And look, I mean, I kind of chuckle because there's been a lot of people who've made a lot of money based on his principles, but just kind of repackaging it and rebranding it. He probably wasn't the first, but for me personally, at 20 years old, he was the first. So things like putting first things first, learning the difference between the important and the urgent, which is such a massive problem in our culture today. With me personally, is it really important that I respond to that text or jump on the Instagram when somebody tags me, or is it just urgent, right? Beginning with the end in mind, beginning with the purpose-driven vision, and then backing into it with objectives, goals, mission, action steps, and beginning with those types of things. I think I agree. I think some people are kind of circling back to them, maybe rebranding them in their own kind of way.
But I love his. I think one of the most impactful is the win-win, mentality. And for me professionally, the win-win and finding through conversation, through, alliances and relationships, finding the win-win that pours through business, professional, into relationships. Finding that win-win through communication and agreement can transform a space for success. So that was just one that pops up in my head. I also really loved his 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leadership. Was another book that had a lot of dog ears and a lot of highlights and underlinings in. But anyways, very good book reference.
Yeah, it's great. That I love the win-win, and you mentioned leaders. I mean, I just think that is the focus. I guess it's Napoleon Hill's comment that you'll succeed best and quickest by helping others to succeed, right? And just this idea of if leaders are leveraging people, they're going to lose them. Leaders who leverage people lose them. Leaders who love people will really leave a legacy, and that's kind of dovetails into your point about just kind of the win-win. Yeah.
How about, are you a movie guy?
I am a movie guy, but most of my movies that I like really date me.
That's
like,
great.
Really
give us one of your
the Bravehearts of the world. Or, I mean, that's obviously he's last name Wallace, kind of a
there you go.
But maybe that dates me a little bit. That's probably my favorite.
Not too bad. I mean, that I can remember when that came out in the theaters. I was probably in maybe elementary, junior high. You're probably in college. So, I mean, that just gives you a date in itself, I mean, I'm the younger dog. You're the older dog. You know what I mean?
Very much older dog.
No, that's a great.
I like the big anthemic movies like that,
yeah,
where it's kind of taps into, really speaks to purpose and vision.
I'm really excited about Mel Gibson's new movie that's coming out this weekend. It's a new kind of, they're referencing it to like Saving Private Ryan level of World War II movie. It's about a military member that was a pacifist that he actually saved. I think it was over 50 plus soldiers and that were caught in a combative situation that came under fire, and he had to one by one save these individuals. But he did it with no rifle, no gun, and he kind of shares and tells his story. So that comes out this Friday. I think it's going to be another one of those epic, tales that'll leave that lasting impact on you. So I'm looking forward to. I'm trying to get the movie pass this weekend to go see that.
That's cool.
We're going to be at my parents' house, so hopefully the parents will watch the kids while
there you go.
Me and the wife go see a movie, but it's going to be a good one. So I know you shared your 5 insights or your 5 what is the word I'm looking for? Intentions.
Yeah.
But also I would want to ask you 3 lessons that you could share that someone immediately could take home and implement. So 3 different life lessons, and they can be from anywhere you pull from.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you, because that's, I'll give you 5, because 5 is kind of the symbolic number that I've been using, kind of hanging on to. Number 1, I would say, practice the 5 intentions daily.
Yeah. Right.
Number 2 is be intentional about finding your inner circle 5, which we really didn't touch on today, but just I believe fully in the Jim Rohn axiom that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with most, right? And so without unpacking that in great detail, we have seen that in effect in our lives, that you can't go at it alone, and that really asking that question, who are your close 5, and are they edifying you or bringing you down? And then secondly, if I'm somebody else's 5, am I bringing up the average or bringing it down? And really focusing on that ratio of 5. It even works with just even positive statements, right? 5 positive statements to 1 criticism, right? 5 positive thoughts for every 1 thought of what I haven't succeeded yet in doing. So that'd be number 2. Number 3 would be do Wim Hof's breathing method for 5 minutes every morning, which I know you've talked with other guests about, but there are some dramatic benefits to your biochemistry and therefore to your mental state as well. And that has been something that I think within 5 years that will be very commonplace, and I hope to see it a lot of places, right? Is his breathing and even his cold therapy. And then the last 2 I would just say, is daily put first things first. I think that's one of the most fastest ways you can implement productivity and effectiveness, is waking up every morning and saying, what are my big 3, in the words of Tim Ferriss or Tony Robbins, or what are the things that are really meaningful I need to accomplish, and not getting distracted from that. And the last one is more of a personal note. Every night when I go to bed, I put my 3 boys down and I say 4 things to them. I say, I love you, I'm proud of you, you make me happy, and Jesus loves you. And don't we as people need to have people in our lives who speak into the core part of our identity and call out our identity, our destiny, our intimacy, kind of who we are, what's our purpose, our vision, why am I here, and who's going to go with me, who's going to believe in me for the journey. So I would say, as a last implementation, just no matter how old they are, take your children aside, look at them in the eye, one-on-one, and say, I love you no matter what, and I'm proud of who you are.
That's great. And then, is there any thing that you would like us to point to? I know the company you work for, how do they, if someone were like, hey, I'm interested in looking at this for investment, own a large company.
Sure. So on the professional front, www.bpcfunds.com, bpcfunds.com will give you information on what we're doing professionally. And then in terms of personally, I'm at Live Breathe Now on Instagram, and we'll, like I mentioned, be doing some music projects and maybe some book writing in the future. So that's how you can kind of keep up with us.
Awesome. Well, anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Man, you guys you're doing a wonderful thing here. I love the idea of amplification of our lives, optimization of our lives through various parts of us, right? And you guys are doing a great job. Thank you so much for letting me be on.
Yo, good stuff, Jason. Thanks for coming on, brother.
Thanks, pal.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us on the Amplify Podcast. You can find more at theamplifypodcast.com. Our social links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Join us in conversation. Let us know what you're thinking and how we can best service you guys. We will see you again really soon.